Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 30 minutes for this last discussion. And I will first give time to the speakers to elaborate a little bit on their own presentation. Perhaps they want to add something, or perhaps they forgot something or got a new idea. And then we have 2 discussion questions. It's about the influence on the process of legislation. And the second question will be regarding the differences between B2B and B2C, the B2C and B2B market. So, of course, I will hand the microphone that's on your face, but to you. Christine Lowe, you have about 2 minutes to come back to your presentation. If you forgot something, or perhaps you want to add something.
Yes, well, actually, I'm interested to see today, for example, for those of us sitting up here, and I think there are people sitting down there, that could be part of a new global conversation of how we actually start that dialogue that we've all been talking about. And I suspect they're going to have to be different types of dialogue, because some are highly technical. You know, how do you improve energy efficiency of cranes and ships? So that's one type of discussion. And I think another type of discussion is how do we help port authorities to understand the magnitude of the environment and the health problem, because very often you need the political drive in a city to be able to change laws. And then you need to be able to work with, I mean, for us in Asia, we're looking at Europe, we're looking at California, and we're asking, well, what are they doing? And how do we get ports to also have that conversation at the business end to try to drive that this is the way of the future? I mean, many of us sitting in the developing world, it's hard for us to just master every single bit. And very often we're focusing on the more technical side, you know, without necessarily looking at how other ports have achieved the political success of changing laws, increasing standards, and talk about where the world's going. So I'd like to see how we can be much better connected to have those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Alexander?
That's a very good introducing, because I think our role as NGO should be that we are the voice in the society which makes visible that action is needed. We can't decide what kind of action. That's a question for the experts in harbors and shipping industry. But it's also a question of power. Even in Hamburg, we are the largest NGO. Oh, we are very proud of that. But I'm here voluntary. I get no single dollar for this. We have one very good expert who made this campaign for us, which has a certain impact, but the voice of the NGO part is a very small voice in the public concert. All these billions of dollars and euros which are earned in that industry are against some 100,000 euro in our headquarters here. So it's also a question of balance. For me, so I have to repeat, it's a very good situation that our administration is open enough to give us the chance to bring these arguments in this discussion. We are only the people who bring the news. It's not us who make this danger. We only inform about it. But we need, for good political discussions, that politicians can see, on the one hand, the economic use of harbors and ports and shipping industry, and on the other hand, what has to be done that this is also environmentally friendly.
Yes, thank you. 2 gentlemen, perhaps not a reaction yet on those 2 statements. Jean, will you?
Yeah, sure, I agree with what was just said. We found some level of success when we work in a collaborative environment with both the environmental regulators as well as the environmental justice groups that are advocating for both clean air and clean water. So setting mutually agreed upon standards of attainment have worked quite well. The aspect of legislation and making sure that everyone's on a level playing field is also quite intriguing. From the port's perspective, I think going down line, we also have to make people aware and understanding of the supply chain itself, because this is where, again, some minds can come together and create solutions that may not have been contemplated even yesterday. And I encourage our colleagues in the environmental sectors to do just that. And to date, that's been a bit of a challenge. So I think there's some good work we can do there as a facilitator of bringing the stakeholders together. We're also working in diligent fashion, as I mentioned, on the development of technology. So I would prefer to spend the time and good energy in working with the original equipment manufacturers, the tiered suppliers, and those doing the research and development, in so much as we're showing that every day. Currently, at this moment, we're testing 15 battery-operated roadworthy trucks that would potentially be licensed on the California streets and highways, freeways. We're also testing 17 yard tractors, as they're called. Now, with both, there are some complications, but we're right in the middle of the development, the testing, and the hopeful infusion into the supply chain. So I would like to see more of that work in the future as well, as opposed to a debate on whether technology is capable at this juncture or does it have a further gestation period. And that will determine the real facts around the cases and give us greater visibility for implementation.
Can I just make an observation here? Jean, if I'm right, I'm hearing from you that you prefer to talk to certain people. And I'm hearing from you that you're not getting, it's hard to get funding for NGOs. And you have to come to these things by paying your own way. So I'm not quite sure whether people like yourselves are talking to each other. But I just want to say that in Hong Kong, we were able to get the government to put out $1.5 billion US to fund approximately a 5-year program to replace all the diesel commercial vehicles in Hong Kong. And there's a great group of them that actually works in the port. So I noticed that in LA and Long Beach, one of the problems that you have is getting the truckers to have a cleaner vehicle. Who's going to pay for what? And I suspect that our experience is knowing what is the harm for the environment and public health, which the ports didn't fund. The NGOs were the ones who used the information to go into the political process, and that is what helped the government to get the money to do something, which the ports actually also will benefit from. So I just wondered what kind of conversation, maybe we need to have multiple conversations that we're all willing to go into without necessarily knowing in advance whether it's a great direct benefit for you or not.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's difficult to include in the discussion the availability of money from the content of the discussion. I'm a fan to make a division into those two. But let's.
If I may, I have a little bit of a counter view. I think that the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, when creating the clean truck program, and you had articulated, Christine, that it was at the threatening of litigation. The iterations beyond that have been absolutely collaborative. We have found grant-making capability at the federal, state, and local level that had not been seen before.
My presentation.
Even to today on the tactical level, I hold an environmental summit at the Port of Los Angeles once every 3 months. The stakeholder community that we speak with is wide-reaching, from, as I mentioned, the regulators to the environmental justice groups and those interested parties who want a better lifestyle, cleaner air and water. So I think that collaborative effect is again going to be witness to the testament of how strongly we believe in this program, and we'll continue to work in those areas.
Okay, thank you for that, Jean. I want to give Johan the time to come back to his presentation, and then we go perhaps to the data guys, and we go to the two questions we mentioned earlier.
Now I'll be
Johan.
positive.
Johan. Yeah, please, Johan.
No, but I think it's necessary for us that we have common goals, that we have measurement platforms that are the same when we compare ports to ports. And also it's very different if you compare a port that just does cruise business or container or ro-ro, because it's different logics of the business. Yeah. And that's where I think we need to come together and discuss from an international perspective how we can help each other and use somewhat of a best practice, because I'm quite sure that a tourist will not use a ship that is very polluting or a port that's polluting, because they're not going to talk about to their neighbors about what a fantastic cruise they were on.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
This is why we began our campaign in the cruise shipping industry, because there is a direct pressure in the market from our information. But more complicated is it with container shipping.
They don't talk.
First they don't talk, and second, the chain is so long between the consumer's decision to the decision of the ship operators that it is very difficult to put some pressure on them. So we have to put the pressure on the public administration that they are looking for rules. And then you get the next effect. The reality is that there is a competition between the ports, but using low standards. And that the port has the problem. If it makes its own standard higher, more protection for its own citizens, the next port will say, oh, that's good for us. Yeah. And so we need a special cooperation between the ports to avoid this kind of competition with lower environmental standards.
Okay, thank you for that. Data guys, do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Ulrich.
Yeah, we got a question, and you see it this time. In fact, it's from me a question.
For you?
From me.
Okay.
To the panel.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to know.
Is it directed to one of the panelists, or?
Not special. I wanted to know from all of the participants, how can the port balance investments in green efforts while investing in new infrastructure and capacity to handle expected increases in cargo and freight traffic? Thank you.
The how question.
Is it from a percentage perspective?
No, just answer it from your perspective, from your point of view, please.
I don't disagree with it. I think things. I would like to put it the other way around, answering your question first, because it has to do with the full chain of logistics, and then you have to look at the different processes. If it's just only within the port, between green and infrastructure investments, or it's a container from Guangdong to the outskirts of Hamburg. That's where we have to look in the whole picture. And often when I'm at seminars like this, we just talk about the small issues within the port, but it's the whole picture, like the California or Hong Kong, where you look at everything that's connected to the port. And that's where I think we go wrong in the discussion.
But I think that's the reason why Christine says we need legislation to make a focus on...
I think in reality is, if you're in government, then every term of government, you know, in Hong Kong it's 5 years, maybe it's 4 years in the US, and, you know, different periods in other jurisdictions. Where you need legislation, you only have the time and capacity to do so much. So if you were able to have a discussion with all the stakeholders, you would still have to say, where am I going to put my priority? So you have to have some agreement amongst the stakeholders what to do first. So for example, in Hong Kong, we discussed with the stakeholders, and they said, look, the easiest thing with the greatest health benefit is to do fuel switching at birth. Because that, for them, they can do it already, there's no additional investments and so on. And if you are going to go for legislation, it actually is also a great public education exercise, because you have to go to the public, you have to go to many people to get an agreement. So I suspect what we're really talking about is in a specific jurisdiction, you're looking at your port, and you have to have some agreement with the key stakeholders. What is it that you want to go for now? What you have to wait and do a little bit later. And I think for the NGOs, to be able to see what you've already taken it off the table, right? You could say, look, we're already there for that. What are we going to go for next? And you're always ahead of the game, right? You're always putting the pressure on the area where they have to go next.
I think an important distinction needs to be made at this point. I spent about half of my career in Asia and the Middle East, so I have a fairly good perspective of how the ports and the shipping companies operate within the container supply chain. In our role in California, specifically for the city of Los Angeles, we are a government agency. We are not a private business, as we see the port operators primarily in the Pacific Rim and the Middle East. So we have a different level of responsibility. This job that I hold today really is five-dimensional. It's a direct report to the mayor of the second largest city in the United States. It's a harbor board of commissioners that is appointed to govern policy for the Port of LA. The stakeholders within the supply chain, including our terminal customers, the environmental groups, both justice and regulatory, and our community. It was mentioned earlier that we're not too close to the neighborhoods. A great majority of our port is directly adjacent to the neighborhoods and the port enclaves of San Pedro, Harbor City, and Wilmington, in so much as we've built a park to buffer our northernmost terminals from the neighborhood in Wilmington. So that plays a distinctive role as well. And the work that has gone thus far as finding money with respect to the alternative marine power program, or cold ironing as we call it here in Europe, the port has spent its own funds on developing that infrastructure. And to date, after 11 years since inception, $183 million of port-generated revenue, not gifts, not grants. The port now has 24 facilities and 72 plug-in locations for these vessels. Mentioned earlier a little bit of the money we're spending on R&D with respect to trucks. The Clean Truck program in Los Angeles and Long Beach was totally funded by the ports, I believe to the tune of $100 million since inception. So this business model is a little different, and I think we need to take advantage of the opportunities commercially in Asia and the Middle East. But in the United States, we have a different role to play, being that agency or that department within the city, and hold ourselves to an extremely high standard. Thank you.
I would like to address the audience a little bit with our discussions, if you don't mind. Do we, data guys, have some questions from the audience? No? If I took my hand mic, would that be a solution for you to answer the questions, make some questions for the discussants? Otherwise, we go to the second and last item. It's should we make differences between B2B and B2C? Who can I give the word first? Differences with regarding to legislation. Alexander?
I didn't understand.
No? B2B and B2C cruise?
I'll take it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I think you've got a couple aspects here in the business-to-business relationship and business-to-consumer, as we mentioned just a moment ago. But also at our port complex, I think it's a B2W or B2E relationship that we need to take into account as well, business to employee. At the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach today, in a typical 5-day work week, we employ more than 192,000 people. 1 in 12 jobs in the city of Los Angeles is directly at the port and its adjacencies. So making sure that we have clean air and clean water for the good people that work every day at the port, I think is of great importance. The work that we do on the container side has great impact, and I think the emissions reductions speak for themselves. Yet there's much more work to do, and we readily understand. As we were talking about on the side, having the consumer visit the port area to join a cruise voyage also needs to be a display of that port's personality in making sure that it is clean, safe environment, as well as attractive, so folks will come back and participate in the cruise experience again. So I think you're putting a number of variables in the equation, all which have different lever points. I think it's a very good question.
Okay. Johan, can you mention it, how it works in Malmö?
Well, especially in Copenhagen when it comes to the cruise business. But before we talked a lot in our board concerning calls. Today we talk more about tonnage and the amount of passengers, because it's like you say, it's perceived quality in what you see, and as we heard this morning, is that if you do a good cruise, you'll probably come back. And that's also always a difficulty in old cities where you don't have the new technology when it comes to infrastructure, and where you have to adopt it. And that, I think that is one of the biggest questions we have to become a better cruise destination, is to take care of the passengers, both because you have, it's not only rich people that cruise, you have mid-income as well, and they're not going to have a limousine standing outside. They want to go on a normal bus. And how do you take care of all these passengers in different modes, depending on what sort of cruise they're coming on?
Yes, Alexander?
I think there is one point which is important, perhaps also for this discussion. It should be easier to compare, to really compare the sustainability of ports. Because as we heard yesterday and today, all ports from their own perspective see themselves at the front line. And that is good, and it's good that because we can see many things are possible. But to be honest, if we want to get a real competition, an honest and credibility, it is not possible to take only the perspectives which are the own perspective of the ports and harbors. We have to have some third institution which is able to compare. There is an institution in Europe, the Ecoports institution, but they hide all their knowledge so that there is no comparison possible. But it would be an incentive, and you always ask for incentive, it would be an incentive if we get more visibility of the real things the ports do in comparison. So that would make a competition to be the best, to be the sustainable. And that would also be only measure things which are feasible. It would not be only the hypothetical vision. It would measure things that are really done. And we should have such kind of transparency and comparison between the ports so that we can really say, for example, a port in Hamburg in a rich region, the region of Hamburg is one of the richest regions in Europe, has to do more, and it is in the middle of the city, has to do more as, for example, Athens or something, another region which has other problems today.
It's very interesting, but you know, I suspect it's going to take us a long time to be able to have the indicators that are direct comparison. And you know, I come from a part of the world where our ports are growing, you know, at a staggering rate. We're building, you know, for example, the port of Shanghai, you know, for their container port, they've just moved it to another big reclaimed island, and we're talking about, again, huge numbers.
Isn't it islands?
Yeah, so, you know, so it's hard to, I'm just thinking for us it's hard to compare. But what I do take home, and I think this is what, for us coming from Asia, what we do want to look at, is we do regard you in California and in Europe as the leaders. So if you can find a way of measuring at least German ports or, you know, Northern European ports, we would find stimulation from that. And we recognize that in California, you're a leader. And what you said earlier on, Jean, is so interesting, because you talked about the governance structure of your port. And, you know, from about 2006, when you became, or you embarked on this tremendous environmental and health cleanup, that was ground zero for us. And I will always remember is Long Beach and Los Angeles, because that stimulated us to look at what we were doing or not doing. And we're now on this path for a cleaner port. So, you know, how can we just have more of these conversations? And I noticed, Jean, that you have an exchange program with the Port of Shanghai.
That's right.
We're speaking to Shanghai, and this is the government, right? The government, the Environmental Protection Department. We're about to enter into a memorandum with our counterparts in Shanghai on exchanging practices and information on regulating shipping emissions. So if there was some effective way for us to continue to share that experience from around the world, that would be very, very useful for us.
Yeah, and I think we can help in that area. We do have an MOU with the Port of Shanghai, and we've worked with them from the Waigaoqiao Chao area to the migration out to Yangshan Deep Sea Port. They're attempting now to replicate the alternative marine power and some of the other initiatives. And having lived there for 4 years, I have a deep affection for what these guys and ladies are trying to do. And we'll help them any way we can. But if we can continue the dialogue with you, I think that would be great. And Alexander, if you can come up with a central depository for information, our mayor has led an open data initiative to which we have both commercial safety security as well as environmental KPIs that we publish monthly. I'd be happy to participate in that just to get it off the ground and see if we could add some comparative reality to what you want to look at. We'd be happy to participate.
Thank you for that.
Is this good vibes or not? Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to finish the discussion. I'm going to ask the panelists for their takeaway if we are in Bali in 2 years. And we sit here together with the 4 of us. Perhaps I'm there too, with the 4 of us. How would it look like? How would the discussion continue from here? Gene?
Well, I hope that the projects that we have on the board right now with respect to technology, as well as development of efficiencies on the supply chain side, can be reported back to our new friends here, as well as our delegate members of IAPH, and we continue to report progress and even more closely woven relationships so we can get to answers that need to be put into motion.
Thank you. Alexander? Bali, 2017?
If we reach that in 2 years, every port management knows their own environmental performance, but serious, from indicators like they are measured in other ports. That would be a real success because that would make the management able to find the right priorities where they should begin with their work.
Thank you. Christine?
What I'd like to see in 2 years, if I have the magic wand, is...
Magic wand. What is Chinese for magic wand? Last time.
It's too complicated.
Okay.
But anyway, it's, I'd like to see the Chinese government to have declared as a matter of national policy to control emissions in specific areas of Chinese waters, so that there could be much bigger, beyond just fuel switching, but to have a much bigger effort that we will embark on over the next 5 years.
Thank you. Johan, you started this stream. You're the last speaker of today. Please.
I think if we have standards in somewhat way that we can do the measurements, as we said before, I think that's very important for us. If we can do that in 2 years, that would be fantastic. But I thought you were going to ask me about the magic wand.
Oh, I've
been thinking about it. Then I would say world peace.
World peace. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for your attention. Panelists.